No, I can't hear you. Try it again. Go to the, oh, I think I hear you now. Nope, still don't.
Checking mic now, Shannon. How's
I
that?
can hear you loud and clear now.
Right in true surface, huh? I can't get this desktop sometimes to work.
I'll have to show you next time I'm down there.
Good, we got a few people join us. It's awesome. Good to see you, Ellie. Hope you're doing great. Debbie, I know you jumped on early. Welcome. Lynette, hopefully I can teach an old dog new tricks. Same thing, Charlene. I'm sure you've got some good stories to share. We'll go over some good things tonight. Peter, good to see you again.
Hello, good to see you too.
Hi, Ben. Welcome, Keon.
Hi.
Hello. It's getting busy down in Tacoma, Ben. Keong, it's crazy down there.
I know. It is crazy. Buyer traffic quadrupled in Pierce County between March and May and went up another 5,000 for June.
Nice for people that own homes right now, huh? You guys are probably happy you bought your condo when you did.
Yeah. 112,000 in 2017. There's
Nice.
170 right now.
Awesome. Yeah, very cool. Okay. We'll give another minute. We've still got some people jumping in, but it's good to see all your faces. Got some good stuff. Shannon, if you want to get the PowerPoint slide up, that'd be great. Okay, I love the photo on this, you guys. That's success right there. When you get that feeling or that rush when you win after getting multiple offers. I mean, that's kind of the feeling that I feel inside when I hear about some of the success that some of you are having, and others, you got to know what you're up against. It's very tough. It almost feels like 2017, where it was really, we had a short little window there in the summertime, which was hot, where in King County specifically, we were having 20 offers. That was not unheard of. So tonight we're going to go over some strategies that might help you win against multiple offers. But just the caveat, even though you do a lot of the things we talk about, you could still be beat out. I know Charlene had a really sad story happen. She has a situation with one of her clients, and it was like, we did everything right, and still the prices, it just went up well above what was possible. I think it was like 150,000, maybe 200,000. Charlene, if you're unmuted, you can give us the story, but it's crazy out there, to say the least. So we hopefully give some ideas. And Ellie, you might need to unmute your line on your voice. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started and get you some good feedback as far as what you can do to structure your offers. We're going to talk about several tactics that work. And then you guys will need to practice or kind of work things out. If you want to talk with me after the call or throughout the week, I'm happy to give you some hints or tricks of making your offers work. Let's go to the next slide. So some of the evaluative factors, what you want to do is you want to think, we're going to talk about each one of these things individually, but just to give kind of an overview, the review periods, the communication, 35E, whether to use a 22AD or a 22AW.
She was with the first company that I worked with.
There we go. And then also to do cash versus waiving financing versus a finance contingency. We're going to go into a little bit of that. And then earnest money and wrapping up with a closing date. So all of these are considerations. If I was a listing agent receiving multiple offers, I would want to have as strong of an offer as possible from those buyer's agents. Okay, next slide. So let's talk first about review periods. So many of you have asked me, what sellers have asked, do I do a review contingency, or do I not? Do I just put it on the market and receive offers as they come in? With COVID, what we're finding is that it really depends on the marketplace and the pricing strategy. Now, if you have a seller who is unrealistic, like I've had one recently, who decides to overprice his home, and you put an offer review date, the offer review date's gonna come and then it's gonna go. So you're wasting time in that regard. However, if you do underprice, now when I say underprice, we don't wanna go crazy underprice. Some of these agents, these listing agents, are taking listings like 150,000 below the market value. I mean, you run the risk that you could underprice and get a good deal for a buyer, and then not do a good job for your seller if you have a review period. But sometimes that works because the escalations, we'll talk more about the escalations and how people do that. But if you're looking at review periods, I would say, you've got a buyer who's got, like, say, do I go ahead and put something in before the review period? Should you wait, or should you beat the weekend? Again, it's all going to come down to that communication that you have with the listing agent. The listing agent may have not even done a CMA. We're finding out time and time again where the listing agent just pops it on the market at, say, a low price at $250 and let the bidding begin. In that case, you do want to make sure you create a CMA for the buyer so the buyer understands how underpriced they are really at. And then as far as waiting to submit your offer, well, certainly if they're not going to review the offers and they're going to just have 20 offers come in, they're not going to want to look at your offer, and you're going to be putting your foot out there. Again, if it's only 2 or 3 offers that are in on a place and you really developed a good rapport with the listing agent, you may want to use terminology like, should we beat the weekend? Would you allow my buyer? Here's kind of the highlights. Would you be willing to take the home, or would your seller be willing to take the home off the weekend, off the market for the weekend? or they are considering they want to see all those offers come through over the weekend. So really most people are waiting to submit as long as the pricing strategy is set up correctly. But again, you have to talk with that listing agent and have good communication with them. Next slide. So communication is really key during the multiple offer situation. Really you want to think of yourself, especially at Best Choice Realty, as are you the ethical? Are you responsive? Are you collaborative? And do you possess integrity? If you're listening to this webinar tonight, or you are going to listen to the recording later, everybody that I've brought to Best Choice Realty do have high ethics, very responsive, collaborative, and possess integrity. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. But you want to communicate that well with the other agent. And certainly that translates well when they're presenting your offer to the seller. So you want to make it as easy as possible for the seller or the listing agent to choose your offer over somebody else. So make sure you pace, make sure you talk at their level, make sure you have the right words to say. And if you don't, you may want to partner with somebody who does possess that type of responsive, collaborative experience that may be needed in order to win at that negotiation. You may want to suggest, if your client is not realistic and you're just trying to get them to write, there's nothing wrong with being in backup position. In fact, we have seen several agents in our firm have been in the backup position, actually a written backup position. And for whatever reason, that first offer didn't come through, and now they're contacting you and they're wanting to put us in official backup. It would be a better situation to be in a backup situation than to have them just come back to you and try to renegotiate the terms. Many times we've saved our clients thousands of dollars by actually getting the seller to agree to a price, even if we're in backup position, by using the 38A. So if you have a situation you want me to discuss with you about that, I'd be happy to walk you through using the backup addendum. Many of you have never used it or haven't used it frequently enough to be able to know how to use it or use it well. If you're a listing agent, you may want to have a 38A. I always, when I'm representing a seller, I always make sure that I select the best offer with my seller, and they pick one, and then I have them pick a second that's a close second. And then I officially make them that backup position just in case things do not go the way we plan. And I would say about 50% of the time, we are looking at that backup offer, or we're leveraging that backup offer to make sure that offer number one, the one we originally selected, performs and gets things done the way we intended them to throughout the contract. So if you're a listing agent, you might want to dust off your 38A and kind of revisit your strategy when it comes to utilizing the backup addendum. When you're presenting your offer, I see a lot of you, not a lot of Best Choice Realty agents, but other agents from other firms, they do a lot of feelings that I've seen in the email that goes along with the offer. Really want to focus on the facts when you are presenting the offer to the seller and through the listing agent. So you want to make sure that you are really focused on that. If you have to, or if your client, and I think it's a good idea for some properties that maybe have taken a lot of care to their home, they live in their home for a long, long time, they've done a lot of updates, love letters would be a great way to go, except you do want to separate them from your offer. Do not put them in the same bundle with your purchase and sale agreement. That is the facts. That's what the seller should be basing their decision on. However, it doesn't hurt to also attach, along with the pre-approval letter, a love letter if it makes sense, if it would help your situation. I had a situation just recently where the love letter did have an impact. And the clients were very emotional about it, and they actually teared up when they read it. Now, did they make their decision based on the price? Yeah, certainly they did, and the timelines that were in the contract, but that definitely helped them in knowing where they wanted to go. You know, as far as a love letter is considered a notice. So if you are receiving a love letter, you can send it to the seller separately, but is not something that they should be using to make a consideration on whether they go with one offer over another. So you can get yourself in trouble if you have put stuff in your love letter, or you encourage your buyer to write things about their race, their ethnicity, or anything like that that would be federal fair housing. You can run into some trouble But if it's just clearly coming from the buyer to the seller and it does not have any of those federal fair housing issues in it, then it is okay to go ahead and attach that with your offer. Now 35E, a lot of you have asked me, do I use it or do I not? And 35E, if you ask any attorney, they hate the 35E, but we as real estate agents use the 35E more than they pretty much want us to. So you always want to, if you are the winning offer, if you're a buyer's agent and you do use a 35E and the seller comes in and the listing agent fills out line 30 through line 35, you are required, you should, and many of you have wait for a few days before we request it in the file, but you should request when they come back and give you the mutual acceptance that it does need to accompany the purchase and sale agreement of that competing offer. Please do not take their word for it, because sometimes I've saved somebody $7,000 because they didn't do the calculation correctly. They tried to pull a fast one and they didn't fill out the competing offer that had closing costs where ours did not. And so we actually saved our client quite a bit of money there just by reviewing the competing offer. Require that when you get that and do it as soon as possible so we don't have any problems. On number 2, many of you have asked me, what do I do? How do I fill out number 2? If you are going to use it, always use the default of 60 days. Don't get creative. Many of you, I went early on when 35E was used in 2015, when they revised some of the things on 35E, I got schooled by another broker, and it was from Coldwell Banker, and my attorney had to get involved, and basically it makes a lot of sense just to keep the default at 60 days. I won't go into it, just leave the default on number 2 at 60 days. Don't change it. I thought I was being good and smart by going 30 or 45. And I could have potentially lost the deal for my client. So use the 60 days, and that's always served me well ever since I had that incident in 2015. The listing agent fills in the worksheet. And then a lot of you ask me, what should I put on the, how much on the first line on term 1, increased by how much? What am I typically seeing? I mean, Jerry Kay sees this a lot more than I do. With the winning offers that come across, but we are seeing that not make as much of a difference. Certainly don't want to put $500. I would probably get my buyer to increase it by a good enough amount. A good rule of thumb would be to consider, what is the mortgage payment like on a property, say of $800,000? Maybe it's like $7,000. So maybe that would be the right amount to increase it by, to a cap price not to exceed. And that goes in the second item on line 13. So line 12, not as important as line 13. Line 13, you will definitely be laughed at. And I will say this very tongue in cheek. When you put something in there that does not make sense, if you're getting financing and let's say that I was writing an offer on 800,000 and I ended up putting on their I'm willing to beat anybody's offer by say $8,000 up to a cap price. And I just went crazy and went for $1 million, knowing that I'm getting financing, knowing that this townhome would certainly not appraise for that. I look silly to that other listing agent when I include a 22A and a finance contingency and all of that sort. So be smart about what you put in as your net price. They do use that as a way. If you have multiple offers and you have 7 offers sitting on the table or more, you can bet your bottom dollar those numbers are going to be pretty close to the same, because again, a buyer's only willing to pay what a buyer's willing to pay. They're not willing to just pay a lot more. In Charlene's case back then, I couldn't believe what that house went for, but it was a unique property and the buyer was willing to come up with the difference in the down payment if it didn't appraise or it didn't come in. They had cash on hand. So there are times where you just will not win, even though you try using the escalation and you do everything we talk about tonight. That net price is probably the most important price you're going to write. In essence, consider that could be the purchase price that your buyer is going to pay. So if your buyer's not willing to pay, in my example, more than say $1,000,001, right? Then that would be the cap price or the net price that they would be willing to pay. So don't just put a number there just because you have to fill it in. Make sure your buyer is willing to pay that amount. go to the next slide. 22 AD. So in Pierce County, we are seeing less removal of finance contingencies, although we are starting to see that a lot in the last month. But we are seeing a lot of 22 ADs. And we saw this in King County, which is really odd. We were almost going to lose out on a property this weekend. It was down to, I think, 7 offers. One of the offers we were up against was a cash, and obviously we were paying more, and we were financed. They liked our escalation, and we were willing to waive the inspection and do some other things, but the seller and the listing agent wanted to counter us, and that was a counter offer, I think at 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night, with a 22 AD. And I had to school this listing agent to let her know that no, you cannot use a 22 AD when it doesn't reference the 22A. So if they're asking us to remove the finance contingency, then the buyer assumes the risk and they actually have to come up with the additional down payment if the appraisal does not come in. The 22 AD is only used when you're using a 22A as well as the 20, then if you have additional funds to come up with additional down for the down payment if the appraisal does not come in. You only use a 22 AD when you use a 22A. So if there is no finance contingency, this is not applicable. And you do have to watch out if you are a buyer that there is a termination clause on number 3 on 22 AD. So if, let's say, for example, my appraisal did not come in, I may not want to notify the seller because they have the right to terminate. I may just want to try to figure out how I'm going to finance it and proceed to closing rather than giving the seller the right to terminate based on the notice of low appraisal. So be very careful on number 3. We had an incident that happened a few years back when we didn't understand number 3 and we went forward thinking, oh, well, the seller can just, we can negotiate that price because the appraisal did not come in. There is a protection clause for the seller in term 3 that you may want to read and make sure you understand. To waive or not to waive, if you are going to be waiving a lot of items, such as finance, such as inspection, such as HOA, title, really making that earnest money non-refundable from the moment you go mutual. Many brokers are having to do that in order to get their clients the deal. And they've been looking. If you are writing right now, I think our top producers are having to write 4 offers to get 1. So if your odds are better than that, good for you. But that's how fast paced and how crazy this marketplace is right now and how limited our supply is, as long as the prices are priced right. So if you've done your CMA, you know the pricing, you've done everything right, you may, even though you've done everything right, you may have to be waiving a lot of items. In that case, you might want to consider using the BCR Form 22D. This is available in Transaction Desk. You can use this. You will have to do a lot of dragging and dropping to place the names in the appropriate sections. But this has been drafted by our attorney where the buyer acknowledges that in a typical real estate transaction, the buyer usually has several contingencies with their offer to purchase, such as financing, inspection, title, etc. If you are not using the Form 22D and you are writing a transaction desk and you're just eliminating 22A, 35, all of these types of things on the left, and you're not using the BCR Form 22D, you may want to have some sort of language or some email that goes from you to your client, just so that you have, in essence, told them, hey, in a typical real estate transaction, we typically use all of these contingencies. But just so you're aware, per your instruction, I am, having you waive certain financing inspection, but that is because you chose to do that. This form kind of covers you a lot better than just an email that goes out from you to your client. So if you are going to waive a lot of things, you may want to consider utilizing this addendum in your offer and then checking the appropriate boxes. Shannon, if you could pull that up, that would be great so I can go through some of these boxes.
Yeah, just give me a second here.
No problem. I'll keep talking. I got a lot of content to cover tonight. So when she's pulling this up, some of the things you guys might want to consider is inspection. You still have to use a Form 35, even though you're waiving. 22D other, if you're in multiple offers, that homeowners association contingency in term 10, that still applies. So you would maybe not use that checkbox. if you are not wanting it to be a contingent on a HOA or a homeowner's review. Other areas is like title contingency. Again, you want to get a copy of that title report, make sure your clients received the title report and reviewed the title report before proceeding with the offer if you're going to waive the title contingency. Same as with the CC&Rs or the resale certificate. If you're dealing with a condominium, you're going to want to make sure that they review all of those items pertinent to them or their situation before they write the offer. Form 17 is another one. You know, if you are in a multiple offer situation, even though the Form 17 is not part of the purchase and sale agreement, I'll say that again, the Form 17 is not part of the purchase and sale agreement. Many sellers are looking at the whole package and looking to see if your buyer has done their due diligence before placing their offer. Meaning, has the buyer reviewed the Form 17 and is comfortable waiving that section in the purchase and sale agreement and also waiving their right to receive it, which is number 1 and number 2 on our optional clauses. The resale certificate not provided, that would be on number 3. So again, there are some things that are typical in a real estate transaction. By checking this box, they in essence are waiving those rights that are provided. 22A, if you're using, obviously if you're cash and you're not using Form 22A, you would not check the number 4. But if there's no finance contingency, then you would check 5. So you have a choice between 4 or 5, depending on your situation. Number 6 is the different type of thing where the buyers may terminate. About the earnest money, talks about that. And number 7 talks about the earnest money being non-refundable. You'll notice it's for some of you that have used the earnest money non-refundable clause before, it is placed in this document as the appropriate way to verbalize or to write in writing the earnest money non-refundable clause that many of you have asked me for and we've provided to you. But number 8 and number 9 would be used, you know, as is, right? That as is language. I don't want to see addenda of Form 34 or 22D saying, buyer is buying as is. That doesn't make any sense to any attorney that I've ever talked to. They would rather see you use something like number 8 in your contract, that the buyers acknowledge and agree, and here are the other things that you are not representing, and it is kind of holding you harmless for these types of warranties or things that we as real estate agents may be aware of, and they're not holding us accountable for that. And number 9 would be the clause that you would use if, say, you were on septic or you were on sewer and you wanted to protect yourself and the firm, that the buyer is not going to make, again, it's still considered as is language. The buyer's buying the home as is, and they've done their tests or they're not going to do anything. So you can see the as is language is like the 3rd or 4th line up from it. But this is the type of thing that you may have to use in order to get your offer to be winning. So again, I would use the form more than trying to copy and paste and try to make sense of it or put it into a Form 34. This has been approved by our attorney and we have used it many, many times. Other firms will have optional clauses for their particular firm causes. Again, if you say you're up against a Windermere agent or a Keller Williams agent and they have, you could certainly ask them for it. Do they have some optional clauses that their firm may want to be used? I'm fine with looking at the way they have things drafted if that would help you get your offer accepted. So again, consider 22A, 35, 22D, the resale certificate, the title, Form 17, septic well, those are all waived. Do you waive it? Do you not? Again, it's up to your buyer on how much they want to make their earnest money be non-refundable, or how badly do they want this property at the price that you've escalated it to. Let's go to the next slide. So to do a finance contingency or not. So here's where we fall into some, again, you guys need to be trained on this. I could probably do a whole class on this, but if you want to take a quick snapshot of this slide, it pretty much breaks down the pros and the cons. It might be a good one for your buyers just to kind of lay out their options. If they have cash, you can see that you will want to use a Form 22EF. Please do not just write a cash offer without including the 22EF. You may not get it. We lost out by $1,000, and this was 2 years ago in 2017. It still pains me because it was a Windermere listing. They ended up liking our offer better. We were pretty close to the same price. I think only $1,000 difference, stronger on many accounts, both cash buyers. Our cash buyer did not use a 22EF. The other cash buyer was with Windermere, and they did. And we could have probably been the winning offer. I believe I'd have to go back and look at the property, but I believe the other Windermere offer they went with was $1,000 less than ours. We're talking $3 million property, and it went to a Windermere broker. So it was like a dual agent situation, and the seller chose that other offer over just $1,000 and not including a 22EF, because the seller did not feel comfortable with the funds, and that the funds were not liquid. They didn't have that protection clause that's in the 22EF for sellers. So 22EF, there is a protection clause, and you've got to watch term number 3 in the protection clause, because the funds at that time must be liquid and at escrow. And that's how the seller feels comfortable working with one offer over another. Cash offers can close quick. That's why they like them. There is no appraisal contingency. So if you are going to want an appraisal contingency, or your buyer is very sensitive, they would need to use a 22AA. That is not a well-used form in our area. In fact, I probably used it only twice in my entire career with a cash buyer. And then oftentimes, understand cash, just because the buyer has received a cash offer doesn't mean that that cash offer is not something that if you're financed that you can't beat. Some of these cash buyers, they won't increase their price. They won't use escalations, and sometimes they won't even negotiate. So you don't know, even if this listing agent says, oh, we have a cash buyer, you might want to ask a follow-up question to understand, is the cash very competitive? Ask some follow-up questions to find out how strong that cash really is, and try to uncover that detail before you submit your financed or not financed contingent buyer. The buyer who's really trying to play on the heart, or get the seller to go with them. Have I won negotiations without cash and with no finance contingency? Yes. Because the way you structure that, if you're not going to use a finance contingency, then you just need to keep in mind on these bullet points here. So use a 22EF, be careful which boxes are checked. In the other section, you would write in the institution that is doing the loan, say 50% is their own funds, is their own cash from Bank of America, and 50% is coming from movement mortgage. If you write it that way, it just needs to go in the other section, and then just watch that term 3, because you have to make sure that you change it from 10 days. I would do 1 or 2 days, because those funds that are from the lender and from your own Bank of America account, they have to be liquid and at escrow 1 or 2 days before closing. That's not the default. The default says 10. So be careful on those boxes and watch term 3 on the 22EF. The one thing to keep in mind on the finance contingency is, if you are not doing a finance contingency, you're waiving your financing rights, realize that your closing costs would have to be paid for by the buyer. Many buyers do not realize, oh, my real estate agent had me waive my finance contingency, but I still need the seller to contribute to my closing costs. They're doing some sort of type of loan that requires that. If you need that paid for by the seller, you would need to indicate this, because there's no place on there's no 22A. 22D other section would be the appropriate place to write that in. If you need some help writing that correctly, I'd be happy to help you. There is no appraisal contingency with the no finance contingency. There's no 22A. There is nothing. You might want to write that in your addenda line, financing waived, just so that it flags it. But the 22EF does allow for the, recently it changed, where it does allow for the sellers to allow, if it's financed, they allow for the appraiser to come into the property, but you would have to make up the difference if it comes in low. So again, that's where you want to think about your 35E and make sure you don't go crazy on your cap price, and make sure the lender can perform the timelines. So if that is not where your client is feeling comfortable, then you have to basically play the game of shortening your finance contingency using the 22A. The lender should be the first person that they should call. They should build a relationship just like you have with that listing agent. Any down payment really should be verified. You need to have copies or proof of funds. Say my client's putting 25% down. I'm going to want to stand out from my peers or from those other offers. I would make sure that I have proof of that down payment along with that pre-approval letter and the lender calling, so that I have a great shot at getting my offer accepted. I don't want any room for people to debate whether my client's down payment was really liquid or was in the bank. I want to verify that just as much as I do want to have my listing or my lender call the listing agent. Also think about tacking things to the top. What I mean by that is you might have to increase the price to cover the closing costs. In those circumstances, also consider that you have situations where your commission is based off of the increased price. So you may want to write in some language about that in the 22D other, where the commission is only based on the listing price. I have one in those circumstances. Again, if you want that language, talk to me about that. If you're tacking things to the top, 10,000, 20,000, it might be a few $100s. You don't want to lose that over a few $100s because the commission you're having to pay is a little bit more. But also consider using a 22AD in this instance, where the buyer may have some additional funds, or they have mom or dad or somebody in their family that can come up with the additional funds if the appraisal does not come in at the value, what they bid up. We're seeing that a lot in Pierce County right now, where you're using a 22AD. We're either seeing a finance contingency with the cut down timelines and the 22AD, or we're seeing no finance contingency altogether. And you need to be able to explain all of the pros and the cons, just like I have here tonight, to your buyer so that they can make a decision on what they're most comfortable doing. Without a finance contingency, your earnest money becomes non-refundable really upon mutual acceptance, unless there's some other provisions that you have in your offer, such as an inspection contingency or a title contingency or things like that. Earnest money, you want to have in multiple offers. If your earnest money is not 3 to 5%, you may need to rethink your strategy. Before people ask me if it's not a busy market, it would be 1%. We could probably get away with that, but not in a busy market. Your guys are going to have to really kind of if some of those first-time buyers, they need to realize that down payment needs to be put up and put into escrow right upon mutual acceptance. That 3% is not uncommon. Most of the offers we're seeing that's getting accepted in a multiple offer situation, that is what we're seeing for earnest money. Non-refundable earnest money, you must use the firm approved language. Do not get creative and just put the earnest money is non-refundable. I saw 2 people in the last 2 weeks, 2 Best Choice Realty agents do that. And I've had to have Jerry Kay call them and give them the language so that doesn't happen again, because then it becomes, so it's non-refundable. Does that mean the sellers get to keep that money? Or does that mean that the buyers it'll be applicable to the price? We're kind of confused by how that language is written. And so is the listing agent, and so is the seller. So don't be writing your own language when it comes to non-refundable earnest money clauses. Use the firm's approved language. Always make sure that's deposited with the closing agent. If you're wanting to ask my feedback on the best type of earnest money, obviously liquid. I mean, if I'm a listing agent and I'm comparing offers, I'm going to take a wire over a check. I'm going to counter you on a cashier's check and maybe have it be a wire. Yeah, and just making sure that you have that kind of discussion with your clients so they understand the difference between a personal check and a wire. A lot of the companies are doing these deposits, these mobile deposits, but even if it's a check, you got the Federal Reserve that has to clear the check. So a wire would be much better, or an ACH. There's some companies that are doing that now. Cashier's check certainly would be an awesome thing to do because we know that the funds are liquid. But yeah, earnest money is a big deal, and don't think that, it's not. Sellers are wanting to keep earnest money because what's happening is you'll win the multiple offer situation, and then in 24 hours, the buyer is like, oh no, I changed my mind. That earnest money becomes the possession of the seller if the buyer does not perform or the contingencies are not waived. So I'm sorry, I'm talking, and so I'm messing up a little bit, but you know what I mean. Just making sure that you have your contingencies. If there's no contingencies, that earnest money becomes the seller's. And a wire would be better than having a check where we're in the process of trying to get the check to clear and it doesn't clear. Something happens or they lose their job. And that has happened a few times with the Corona that we've had. We've had some challenges when it came to earnest money. So be sure that you get that get that written correctly, I would do wire or cashier's check in the other section, and then make the closing agent handle the earnest money. And then again, I would make it a determination on how strong my client wanted to run this, whether or not I use the non-refundable or use the 22D BCR clause for that. Closing date, the last slide I've got tonight. I know I'm a little over, but this is the last one. It was closing date, honor before language. So be careful you don't write honor before language. If you're up against one other offer and you're trying to show flexibility, I can understand using the honor before language. But if you're using a 22EF, remember there's that seller terminology. And if you write honor before, attorneys don't like that. And again, it causes problems down the road. So it's best to have an actual physical closing date on there. Know what you're up against, know what that is. Don't try not to write the honor before language. Try to understand what closing date makes the most sense for that seller. I've seen deals where it's like they'll accept $5,000 less if the closing date and their moving plans are orchestrated in such a way that the seller is much more comfortable, especially with COVID. So I try to get much more in the head of the listing agent and the seller to try to identify what is their moving plans, how do they want to structure it. Maybe I do need to do a 65B rent back. If I do, can the buyers do $0 rent? Yes, they can. On the contract, you would have to write 65B, $0, and you could include that at the back of your contract. Again, a rental agreement is really between the landlord and the tenant, but on the first page of the purchase and sale agreement, you can indicate on the possession date C or C65B to reference that possession date. Flexibility is really key, and a lot of good communication and negotiation. Don't be messing it up though with personal belongings. A few of you have tried that, and it's been reckless, in my opinion. When you have personal belongings and you're like negotiating over the dining room table and some of the other things, I understand you're trying to make this easy for the seller, but it's super complicated when it comes to dollars and cents on negotiating the items. Sometimes it makes sense, most of the times it doesn't. You got to really read your situation and know the listing agent and how they work to understand how to write that up and negotiate personal belongings when it comes to a multiple offer situation. I've seen some people do well, and then some. Most of the time they we don't want a riding lawnmower holding up the deal, or a washer and dryer holding up the deal. Some of those personal belongings, again, are negotiable, but let's not make that the determination, from one offer over another. Have some flexibility and watch those personal belongings. I think that's it, Shannon. Was there any questions that came in?
Oh, I'm sure we've got plenty of questions, but I'll start with some of the ones that I got from the very beginning, which is, as a listing agent, will a review date deter buyers?
As a listing agent, will a review date deter buyers?
If you have an offer review date.
It depends on the neighborhood. It depends on what is typical in an area. So in a certain area, like say way down in Chehalis, having an offer review date when the inventory is more like 2 or 3 months worth of supply, probably wouldn't do an offer review date. It's not common down in Chehalis to do that type of thing. If it's in, say, Green Lake, and they do offer review dates on Tuesdays, they list them, and the inventory is less than a month of supply, yeah, probably would do an offer review date. So really, you have to look at your inventory and make sure that your strategy meets the inventory. And you definitely have to price it. You can't price it, overprice it, and then think that you're going to get offers. You won't. I've got one right now. If you guys want to look at my listing in Ballard, you can see that it's overpriced and it needs to be reduced in order to employ that strategy. I'm in the process of reducing the price, and I'm going to probably re-advertise it and remarket it. And then I probably will do an offer review date. But again, it's a lot harder to try to put that on after the fact. It's a lot easier to know your strategy and know your inventory and price it in that kind of strategy than to try to do it after the fact. So the seller has to have the appetite for that type of system or structure.
Another question I got is, what does a buyer CMA look like? How do I communicate that to my buyer?
Same as the seller. You actually would do the same type of analysis as you would for the listing agent. Buyer's agents make sometimes the best listing agents because they have seen so much inventory on the market, and they know what things subjectively should be adjusted for. So if I saw something that needed all new carpeting, I would be able to take those adjustments, versus the other one we looked at that we're going to offer on. This one has brand new carpeting. So, you do the CMA just like you would as a listing. In fact, you might have more intelligence about that than you would if you were actually going on a listing appointment, because you have seen the competition and you know how to adjust maybe the comparables to make that make sense. But yes, I could do a simple CMA just using the matrix and using the MLS to identify, 3 actives, 3 pending, if you can find 3 pending, and 3 solds within a certain geographic area. Again, start narrow and work your way out. And you can get a good feel out of like, how much did they underprice this by? Was it underpriced by 50,000? Was it underpriced by 20,000? Was it just underpriced by 10? You wouldn't know that unless you did a CMA. So again, use the tools that you have, and again, put your listing agent or thinking cap on and actually you're almost doing the listing agent job for them in many times.
Okay, so I got a couple questions about backup offers. So if someone is in backup offers, is there anything we need to worry about in terms of timelines, like we would in terms of cutting timelines down or something like that?
Yes, because a backup offer, if the first buyer falls apart, you can counter that backup addendum and tighten down some of those timelines, because if they do come into position, they would actually, it goes right, you put them right into position and they have their inspection, their finance, all of those contingencies that they may have had, that becomes the contract. So they don't go back to active on the market, they go with the second buyer that was strong. And like I said, 50% of the time I've had to use or leverage that backup addendum as a way to keep that first one in line, or they just flaked out and I was able to put that second in position and get it done for the seller. The seller loves it when you have that strategy.
Right. Another question I got is, how does redisclosure work? Or is the buyer entitled to know why the first buyer backed out when it comes to backup offers?
When it comes to backup offers, they don't have to disclose anything. So a listing agent does not have to disclose what the other offer is as far as what price. There's not any duty. We don't have any duty as listing agents to convey anything to those buyers agents on the reason for why we chose one offer over another. And you want to be very careful. We've had some close calls. Make sure you're using that email to communicate that, yes, you have presented all your offers to the seller, but the buyer chose the one that just fit them best. Don't discuss anything about, they got 15,000 over asking, none of that. You really should keep that close to your vest. Did that answer the question? I don't know if I answered that one completely.
Yeah, probably. Another question I got was, how can we handle, is there any way that we can handle a situation where a seller has taken another offer without informing the buyer's agents? So if there are multiple offers, they told the winning offer, but they didn't tell the other ones.
That's not a good way to run a business, especially if you want to keep goodwill with your cooperative brokers out there in the field. You can get a bad reputation very fast if you're a listing agent and you don't communicate. You could have one bad experience and then it sets the tone for everyone. So I would say there are rules for changing statuses. You have to follow the Northwest MLS. You have to change the status within the next day following acceptance. If they don't do that, then they can be fined, and the MLS can receive complaints about that broker. That's not in our rules of conduct. But does it happen? Yes. Have that happen to me? Yes. Again, I can help you if you want by contacting their designated broker or ensuring that their offer was indeed presented. But that's the only real thing that has to be done. You clearly might not have got it because of the way the terms were set, and they did a poor job of communicating, but that's not, again, it's more of an ethics, Shannon, than anything on that type of issue.
Yeah, and I know that, I've spoken with a couple agents recently where they've been in the situation where their buyer ends up finding out on Redfin's website or on HomeSnap or something like that, oh, it's pending. Did we get it? So it's, yeah, there's not really much that you can do other than to shake it off and go find another one.
Right.
Another question when we got to the form section is, and this is just kind of to, I think, a reiteration of what we've talked about, is when we're talking about waiving different contingencies, can I just exclude a form from the purchase and sale in order for it to be waived?
The answer is yes, except for Form 35. And I would say 22D is optional clauses. I would not include a 22D, but you could remove the 22A, you could remove the 22T, you could remove the 35F potentially. I would just always, with a residential purchase and sale agreement, or a condominium purchase and sale agreement, always use a Form 35, because there is that section that talks about waiver. You never want to be caught saying that we had to waive the inspection in order to get the deal. We never want to have that. It is in Washington State, it's our duty as real estate agents to advise that our clients get an inspection. Our inspection clause is the only way that our buyers are protected for disclosure and doing their due diligence and things of that nature. So those are the two I would always include, 22D and 35, even if you've waived. If you want to write on the addenda line next to the 35, waived, so that the listing agent doesn't miss it, by, oh, they got a 35, you could do that. You could write that on there. I've seen some of you do that. But yeah, I would go ahead and include those addenda. And the BCR optional clauses, you'd actually have to write that or type that into the addenda line. So say, for example, I was not using a 22A, I was not using some of these addenda, or not even a septic contingency, I would make sure that the BCR optional clauses is part of the contract and write that in the addenda line.
Okay. And another question regarding some of the forms, especially when it comes to waiving financing, where can we get so I think we already answered this question in the call, but waiving financing language for an appraisal, you're waiving your financing, do you put it on the 22D?
You're waiving your finance?
Waiving financing, but they want the language for the appraisal, it looks like.
Oh, I see. You'd have to write that in. You'd have to put that in 22D other or a Form 34, the language about that.
Let's see. And it looks like Emily had a question about the BCR multiple offer form. Can we add it after the initial offer?
Yes, some of you have done that and done it well, where you get your offer submitted and then you find out that they're going to be reviewing it, say at 5 o'clock, and they came back and you said, yeah, you're pretty strong. And you've gone in and you've just added that, and you've had the buyer initial it, and you walk the listing agent through the reasons for using that it's in their best interest to consider some of the adjustments. Yeah, I have seen some of our brokers win using that addendum and doing it after they've submitted initially.
Okay, and then one more question. So whenever we have a closing date that deviates, or a closing date that deviates from possession, we always need to be using some sort of rent back, correct?
Correct.
Is there a
65A
reason
or
for that?
65B. I'm sorry, say that one more time.
Is there a reason for that?
Anytime because I can give you, that's a whole another class on 65A and 65B. We probably should do that, or have Jerry K help us with that. Because there's all kinds of landmines there. So I would say just make it best practice that if you are not putting the possession date on closing, that you have a 65A or 65B. It's pretty simple. We can explain that later on a later call.
Okay, and I think that's all the questions I got through chats and texts and whatnot. But I think one thing to note too, I know when you were talking about Earnest Money, a lot of companies, title and escrow companies, are getting very into the mobile apps these days. So it's not uncommon to see ways for you to deposit Earnest Money straight from an app. So it's secure. They just log into their banks and then it syncs up with the app, and then they're able to deposit the money a lot faster, a lot less hassle. The agent never touches it. It just makes a lot more sense sometimes.
Yep.
So,
just having a conversation maybe on what that seller is comfortable with. A wire to me is pretty simple. Yeah, there's a wiring fee, maybe $15, $25, but for me, it's worth every penny on the wire. So if I was a listing agent and I saw the different types, I would say that I was awaiting it. The wire would be the easiest way because I knew that the money would be in the bank account.
And I just unmuted your line, Emily. It looks like you're sneaking in one more question. Go for
Yeah,
it.
well, actually, I was just going to say about the wire. I love wire too, except I've even brought to attention, like when we open escrow, I've asked the listing broker, or if I send the contract myself, I brought to the attention of the escrow officer, hey, this is a wire. My clients need the information right away, and they still sometimes take a day or two, which makes us non-compliant with depositing earnest money. So just, you know, as a tip to everybody, make sure escrow gets us information fast enough. I've had to extend the earnest money deadline a couple of times recently because they're slow to get us that.
Listing agents not doing their job, Emily. They just put it on the market and let it go. Make us do all the work, right?
Yeah.
Make us get the information for the wiring too. Oh boy, that wouldn't be the first time.
I know. I know. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. But no, a good point though she makes as far as contacting escrow. When you get mutual, yeah, it is your job to make sure earnest money gets deposited, even if it's a wire. So contact the closer, and they all have wiring instructions, and they can email that over to you, and then you can forward that to your buyer. Awesome. Well, we had a lot to cover. Sorry we went late tonight, but don't forget we do have a Wednesday call on the FERPTA. We've had some challenges with FERPTA, so we're going to do a FERPTA class. It'll just be a 1-hour class on Wednesday. So if you want to jump on Wednesday at noon, we are going to be doing that class. I will record it if you're in the middle of something. So have a great week, you guys, and we'll talk to you soon.